Hi, my name is Sara Stanley, and I live in Maple Ridge. My former high school is Garibaldi Secondary, just streets away from where I currently live. Because of the pandemic, I was unable to visit in person even though the school is so close to me, and at that time learn who is best to talk to about Indigenous education and chat or set up a chat with them. I'm so grateful, however, for what did transpire. I emailed the principal from the school, and he shared with me that while he could probably give some answers to these questions, it would be best for me to speak with Ramona Elke. This excited me because I'd heard that name before when I was a student, but I never had the opportunity to speak with her. I knew she held an incredible reputation. I knew that this woman was someone who deeply cared about things and would speak truth. In her first email to me, she shared that she teaches BC First Nations along with the English First Peoples 11 and 12 courses at the school. She shared that she also has a Master of Educational Practice in Indigenous Education for Reconciliation and Resurgence. And she shared that she wanted to teach me what she has learned herself. I knew a conversation with her would be good. And it was. Over an hour of intentional, vulnerable, honest conversation. But I've only got 8 minutes here, so I will try my best to summarize some of what I learned that day during that Zoom call. The first question was, what are the barriers to Indigenous parent engagement at this school? And the response I was given was something I'd never even considered before. Ramona shared that residential schools really wounded the Katzie, who are the people of this land, and that because of that, the actual school buildings are too much of a trigger. She shared that maybe a parent is a survivor of the residential school system or lived with a survivor, somebody who experienced it, and there are wounds that still penetrate, wounds that have not healed. So what is one barrier to Indigenous parent engagement? What the school buildings represent. The continuing colonial approach to learning spaces. It's uninviting, to say the least. To this I asked, how can this barrier be broken or fully removed? Is it even possible? And Ramona shared that spaces need to be examined. She shared that perhaps something as shallow as house poles being erected could help, but that the ultimate way to approach this barrier would be to honor the Katzie through true consultation with architects and the school board. A sit-down meeting where traditional learning spaces of the people are discussed and implemented. If architecture better represented the Indigenous community, metaphorically, walls would be let down. Not only would parents likely come to a place of feeling comfortable in and associated with a space, but so too would the community as a whole. But as lovely as this potential sounds, there is also another barrier that must be acknowledged and addressed. This is a barrier of people, of how relationships are approached. Ramona shared that often administrative staff and teachers do not know how to deal with Indigenous students and their families and communities. I'll talk more about this in the next question, but a point she greatly stressed here is that prospective teachers like myself, along with those already working in the school system, need to exhibit humility, kindness, and compassion. The second question asked was, how have the teachers at the school drawn on the strengths of Indigenous families and communities to support teaching and learning? And Ramona began her answer bluntly. She shared that few people at the school truly engage in Indigenous pedagogies, that teachers often regard Indigenous pedagogy as a curriculum checking off the boxes rather than understanding it as a worldview, a way of being. This is where I want to return the point I briefly mentioned before. about the barrier of people, about administrative staff and teachers not knowing how to deal with Indigenous students and their families and communities. Ramona explained that these people, the staff and teachers, repeatedly use the excuse that they don't want to get it wrong, that they don't want to approach Indigenous people in a wrong way, so they don't even try, that they don't want to teach Indigenous pedagogies in a wrong way, so they don't even try. She shared that this ideology just speaks about our education system and how punitive elements are penetrating minds, even the minds of those doing the teaching. This is not how education should be. Ramona expressed that the classroom should be a place of gentle correction and conversation if clear wrong ideas or actions are presented. And this goes beyond Indigenous students and the implementation of Indigenous pedagogies, but for all students and the implementation of all sorts of ideas. But to stay on the topic of Indigenous education, Ramona indicated that she knows the school has lots of inclusive teachers, or those that attempt inclusivity, but that only one other teacher makes the attempt to understand Indigenous people and their relationship to the land. One of the most significant thoughts she shared with me is that learning happens everywhere, and that teachers frequently forget this. If an Indigenous student is absent from class because they are part of a ceremony or are fishing, the student is gaining a lived experience, not losing out academically. It just looks different because it is not the dominant colonial way of educating. And what success looks like in a European worldview differs from what success looks like in an Indigenous one. We need to be mindful of that. I asked Ramona what a teacher hesitant to teach Indigenous content and/or pedagogies should do. And she vocalized that a teacher should educate themselves first. That makes sense. You need to understand something before you can adequately teach it. But she goes on to say that a teacher should educate themselves on the specific Indigenous community of the land that they are doing their teaching. That while broad Indigenous understanding is good, it is not enough. There's diversity among nations, and that knowledge is so important. So she recommends that post-pandemic, if any event is being offered by nations, the hesitant teacher, and really anyone, should participate, and participate openly and gently. There's so much more I could say here, but for sake of time, I must continue on to the last question. The last question I asked Ramona was, how have you engaged and worked respectfully with Indigenous communities? To which she responded with an example from December 2018. That winter, her students prepared an elders' feast. Deer stew and bannock was prepared. Elders were invited to come and sit with her students, who had worked on traditional Coast Salish weaving and paddle carvings that would serve as gifts for those who came. Ramona shared, "You always gift the people." A few of the invited people had the courage to come, and a question was raised. One elder asked, "Why do you do this?" And the response was, "Because we want to know you, and we want to be better." This is unusual. Indigenous communities don't hear that very often. Usually they are approached with outstretched hands that are ready to take. But this wasn't like that. Ramona shared that the group was then gifted with a story from an elder about his residential school experience. A powerful moment for all involved. a moment filled with honor, a step in the right direction to restore a profoundly damaged relationship between those who are indigenous to the land here and those who are not. To briefly conclude, because I'm over time already, I want to express my gratitude for this assignment and for my conversation with Ramona Elke. I really value the time Ramona set aside to help me with my understandings, and I am grateful for the time I've spent in reflection prior to this filming. I do hope this learning has been made clear here. Thanks for listening, and I hope you have a great day.